Welcome to the very first video that's going to be a Wuthering Waves yap fest about the game or the state of the community, things like that. Figured I wanted to just kind of share my opinion and talk a little bit about WUWA and where the future of it's going to go and stuff like that, because I've been playing it a lot. I'm already UL 41, I've got a ton of God Roll Echo sets and stuff like that, and a pretty good team. I've also played Genshin and HSR, so I have some experience with those games as well. And I've just heard a lot of debate about the game, so I wanted to talk about it a little bit in this video. Okay, so the main point that I want to talk about today is basically the hatred that some people have for Wuthering Waves in like r/gacha gaming, for example. So if you're not caught up, basically r/gacha gaming, which is one of the worst subreddits on the entire website, seriously, you can just avoid it altogether and your life will be a lot better. Basically, there's been a lot of people talking about these posts on r/gacha gaming that are basically talking really negatively about Wuthering Waves and saying that it's going to fail and different things like that, because that subreddit is invested into a lot of other gacha games, and for that reason, they don't really want Wuthering Waves to take off because it means that they are kind of being left behind, essentially. And unfortunately, the gacha gaming community has essentially just kind of got to this really terrible point over all these years. The community that kind of came out of the woodworks and cropped up around Genshin Impact was one of the worst communities on the entire planet. Obviously, it's not all bad. There are some people from the Genshin community that aren't terrible people, but a lot of them are. But you don't need me to tell you that. There's been countless amounts of articles and tweets and etc. over the years that have very well proved that. Today, though, what I want to talk about is the stupid logic of wanting Wuthering Waves to fail just because you're invested into other gacha games. Even if you don't play Wuthering Waves or you don't like it and you want to stick to your other gacha games like Genshin Impact or Honkai Star Rail, you can just totally do that. Like, that's not a problem. You can stick to those games and you don't have to play Wuthering Waves. But Wuthering Waves existing is actually good for you because the existence of Wuthering Waves drives competition. See, one of the major problems with Genshin Impact is that there was not really anything to even challenge it. Tower of Fantasy came out and that game was kind of a big deal on release, but now it basically never gets talked about. You never hear someone say that they play Tower of Fantasy. It's always like they play Genshin or HSR or whatever. So that game really did not create a big enough competition for Genshin Impact. I personally played Tower of Fantasy myself, felt like it didn't really have like a good coherent theme. It sort of just felt like this mangled version of a gacha game with a bunch of random parts stuck together. Just a bunch of like random references and random parts put together. Genshin is a lot different than this, and one thing I can praise them for is the game really feels like it has a theme to it. The characters are very iconic and recognizable, and the overall art style of the game is just something that you can instantly notice. So basically my point is Tower of Fantasy was never really a big piece of competition for Genshin, and so it never really caused them to actually have to do anything as a result of Tower of Fantasy existing. And of course, Honkai Star Rail isn't the same type of game as Genshin, and it's also owned by the same company, so again, not really any competition there. So for all these years, Genshin has kind of just sat at the top of the throne with absolutely no challengers, and for that reason, they've treated their game pretty badly. Again, this isn't really something I have to talk about, it's already been said a million times before, but for example, we can look at the first anniversary where there was an insanely low amount of Primogems offered, which is completely contradictory to like every other gacha game's first anniversary ever, and I can almost guarantee that Wuthering Waves' first anniversary is going to have like probably multiple free 10 pulls. The reason Genshin actually did that for their first anniversary is because they see you as a number. They don't really care about their consumers or who's playing the game. They just care about you playing the game and them making money off of you. And when they have zero competition whatsoever, there's no incentive for them to provide or to try and retain your attention to the game. They can give you that lackluster number of pulls because they know you're gonna keep playing Genshin Impact. There's no other game like it for you to play or for you to have your attention distracted by. And that's exactly where Wuthering Waves comes in. Wuthering Waves has done so well and has had so much positive reception that it has created an actual sort of competition for Genshin Impact. And the effects of this we're probably not going to see for a little while as Genshin sort of has to plan and get everything ready, but I guarantee a lot of the practices that people are not very happy with Hoyoverse are going to be kind of phased out going forward because Genshin wants people to play their game, not Wuthering Waves. Now a game exists that directly competes with Genshin and does a lot of things better. So a lot of people that were dissatisfied with Genshin's bad policies and bad practices can now move over to Wuthering Waves where a lot of those practices are changed. Like the stamina system, for example. One of the biggest complaints with Genshin Impact was just how clunky and how bad the stamina system kind of felt to play with.
Next up is Barbara, and she's on a whole different level than Amber. The loudness of the moan has much fuller resonance.
But Wuthering Waves changed this massively and made it a lot more fun and a lot more fluid, allowing you to scale a lot more walls and do a lot better parkour, which was not something that was possible in Genshin, and a huge improvement in Wuthering Waves. And these sort of things are all things that Genshin Impact can improve on, and different ideas that they can actually just take. After all, Wuthering Waves did definitely get inspired by Genshin. You can see it in a lot of the different characters, you can see it in the stylization of the game and the way that like echoes work, but simply put, the base version of Wuthering Waves that we currently have is just a much better version of Genshin Impact. One thing that I wanted to touch on that I don't think a lot of people talked about was the fact that in Genshin Impact, when it actually first released, there was no new character for quite a while. If I recall correctly, the first new limited character to be released was Tartaglia, or whatever his name was, the spear guy. I remember that because I primarily played Genshin on release and I really wanted the Tartaglia guy, but it was really annoying because every time I would log into Genshin over that like first 2 weeks, he was just never out. And he took quite a while to actually come out too, if I remember correctly. But Wuthering Waves did something completely different, and they had this character Yinlin who a lot of people wanted, and they released her very early into the game being out. So it felt like there was this actual content update that came to Wuthering Waves after its initial release. So there was like actually new stuff to do and new characters to get after like a week of playing Wuthering Waves, which is a lot better feeling. They're also being extremely transparent and telling us that even more characters are going to come on June 28th and things like that, and that's also very important for a company. And so that kind of transitions us into the next part of this video, which is basically the future of Wuthering Waves. So obviously I think there's going to be a lot of vitriol and people just saying that Wuthering Waves sucks right now because they are invested in other gacha games and they don't want a new one to become successful because they're going to feel like they have FOMO. But I think this problem is sort of contained into the release time of Wuthering Waves, and I don't think these people are really going to persist after a long period of time. It's going to feel like there's so much more content in the game that the fear of missing out kind of just ends up phasing out entirely because they're so far behind in the first place. There's no reason to complain about another gacha game that you feel like you're missing out on if there's just so much content in it that it's going to take you an extremely long time to even get caught up in the first place. At a certain point, you've already missed out. That's actually how I feel about Honkai Star Rail a lot. I played Star Rail on release. I got to like Trailblazer level 30 or something like that, and then I kind of just quit and dropped the game entirely. But now, after looking into a lot of the Honkai Star Rail stuff and seeing the cool new bosses and all the great characters and all the things they've done, like giving out the free 5-star limited unit, I feel that I missed out too because I didn't play this entire time, so I didn't save up a bunch of the resources that I need. I didn't clear a lot of the story and things like that. I didn't get my characters leveled up. I can't do some of the cool endgame content. And now there's so much content in Honkai Star Rail that my only option is to just play it and grind through everything to get caught up if I want to be part of the Honkai Star Rail gameplay loop. So I have no fear of missing out, and I don't have any negative feelings towards Honkai Star Rail because there's so much content in the game that there's no way I'm going to catch up anyway. So yeah, I think in the future cycle of Wuthering Waves' existence, I don't think these people that are talking negatively about it on like r/gacha gaming are going to continue doing that. It just doesn't really make sense. One of the main complaints I'm seeing about the game, of course, is its performance, but I think this is always just a really stupid complaint, especially about Wuthering Waves, because they've already made it very clear that they know about the performance issues and they're working on fixing them. They've literally already sent compensation to us for the performance issues. Like, they know the performance issues exist. They're completely aware of it. Complaining about the performance at this point is just really stupid because they already know and they're already working on it. Over time, those are going to get ironed out as the game makes more money and they're able to put more development towards that kind of thing. As far as my memory serves me, I don't think there's been any game that has gotten worse over time in terms of their base performance. Arc Survival Evolved is a good example. That game had terrible performance on launch, but over time and after the game made a lot more money, they were able to iron a lot of those issues out, and now you can play Arc Survival Evolved on decent settings on a lower end machine. Obviously, some performance issues still exist with Arc Survival Evolved, but it got a lot better over time because they were able to allocate more resources towards fixing that. That's just kind of the cycle of how performance issues work in general. What we don't want is a company that doesn't acknowledge the performance issues at all and never tries to fix them. That's something that has kind of happened with Honkai Star Rail and Genshin, where on a lot of the sort of mid or kind of older devices on mobile, you're still going to have the device heat up like crazy. Like my iPhone, for example, heats up like crazy and drains my battery when I play Honkai Star Rail, and this is largely just because Hoyoverse didn't really address the issues and never really tried to fix them. To be completely fair, it's an extremely demanding game for a mobile device, but it could be improved and just isn't being improved because, again, there's not really any competition and no reason for them to do any of that. But Wuthering Waves does have competition. They're fighting one of the biggest giants in the gacha category in general, so fixing these performance issues fast is one thing they've really prioritized, and obviously they are working on it. And even though its performance still sucks, I'm not going to act like it's perfect. It has improved significantly, and I have felt that the game has got a lot more fluid and a lot more playable. My PC is pretty old, but it runs Wuthering Waves like butter. It's like very, very smooth. There's not really any issues. I have problems with like the first 5 minutes of startup. Sometimes it'll like kind of lag and load in all the assets, but after it does that, it's just completely smooth. Another big complaint has been like camera issues, camera acceleration, and things like that. Personally, I don't share that complaint. I have not had any problems with the camera, and I don't really know why people are talking about that, but of course that's just my anecdotal experience. If you guys are having issues with the camera, then that obviously sucks, but again, they're going to fix it in the future. In fact, they already were notified about camera issues with Morning Ikes, the boss. They are aware that the issues exist, so again, it's a stupid complaint to have because they're going to fix them. And finally, the last complaint that I've seen is that there isn't going to be enough free pulls in Wuthering Waves for free-to-play players, and to be honest with you, I just don't really agree with this point at all. Wuthering Waves has already given out so much free stuff and so many free pulls just to anybody, vastly more than Genshin Impact did on their launch. I've played with a lot of characters in Wuthering Waves already, including a lot of the 4 stars. I mean, I'm building Alto right now, who is a character that is kind of just overlooked by a lot of people, and honestly, he's pretty good. And he can finish a lot of the endgame content as long as I build him correctly, which is all very, very possible. My main complaint with Wuthering Waves in general would just be the fact that you have to farm all of these random forgery systems. It just feels like there's too many different materials, and that feels like it can be streamlined a little bit better. I don't want to have to spend my wave plates on a whole bunch of different forge challenges when I need them for other more important things, and I feel like the resources that you actually get from doing those forge challenges are just too minimal. You just don't really get enough resources at all. But anyway, that's going to be the yap session about Wuthering Waves. You don't have to hate on Wuthering Waves just because it's the big new thing. You can keep playing Genshin Impact. I guarantee the game is going to get significantly better now because they actually have a competitor in the space and they can't get away with just giving you 200 Primo Gems for the 50th anniversary. You don't have to knock other games just because they're new. Go drink some water, it's the elixir of life. Be kind to each other, have a good day. See ya.